Study finds cannabis users had better COVID-19 outcomes. Now, this is going to be a touchy subject for a lot of people and a very interesting and potentially controversial article, but trust the science, right? Follow the science. Trust doctors. Well, let's look at it. Cannabis users who contracted COVID-19 had better outcomes and reduced mortality compared to people who do not use marijuana, according to a new research presented at a conference in Hawaii this week. Shout out to everybody in Hawaii who was affected by the fires. My thoughts and prayers are with you. I hope you recover and get everything back on track as quickly as possible. A presentation on the study, which was conducted through a review of medical records of more than 320,000 individuals, was delivered on Wednesday at the annual meeting of the American College of Chest Physicians in Honolulu. CHEST, their abbreviations are CHEST. I love how clever we are. Quote, marijuana smokers had better outcomes and mortality compared to non-users, the authors of the study wrote. The beneficial effect of marijuana use may be attributed to its potential to inhibit viral entry into cells and prevent the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. I think that's how you pronounce it. Thus mitigating cytokine release syndrome. To conduct the study, a team of researchers analyzed data on 322,214 patients from the National Inpatient Sample, a U.S. government database that tracks hospital use and outcomes. Patients who were under the age of 18 or who had information missing from the database were excluded from the study. Okay, so they're saying and suggesting it was a pretty thorough study. Among the patients in the sample, 2,600, less than 1%, said that they were cannabis users. So less than 1% of the people in this study said they were cannabis users out of 322,000 people. The patients in the sample were divided into two groups based on marijuana use. Data from the sample was then used, quote, to match marijuana users to non-users 1-to-1 on age, race, gender, and 17 other comorbidities, including chronic lung disease. When comparing cannabis users to non-users, the researchers determined that cannabis users, quote, were younger and had higher prevalence of tobacco use. Among the patients who do not use cannabis, quote, other comorbidities including obstructive sleep apnea, obesity, hypertension, and diabetes were more prevalent. The analysis determined that cannabis users had significantly lower mortality compared to non-users, 2.9% compared to 13.5%. Cannabis users also had significantly lower rates of complications associated with COVID-19, such as intubation, acute respiratory failure, multi-organ failure. I'm guessing less hospitalizations as well. On Univariate analysis, marijuana users had significantly lower rates of intubation, 6.8% to 12%. Acute respiratory distress syndrome, acute respiratory failure, and severe sepsis with multi-organ failure. You can look at the article. I'll post it on the comments so you can check out all the data for yourself. They also had lower in-hospital cardiac arrest and mortality. Now, this is interesting because there was a propaganda article that came out not too long ago that says cannabis users are more likely to have heart failure. Now, they didn't say that it meant older people, and they forgot to say that it was when hospitalized. Now, if that's true, that older people over 65 are at more rate of having heart failure if they use cannabis, this study literally says that's wrong. Now, COVID is a big variant, but it says they also had lower in-hospital cardiac arrest and mortality. By significantly amounts, actually. Now, that's at odds with that study that says older people are more likely to go into cardiac arrest if they use cannabis. This is just interesting. It's interesting how this data is conflicting and kind of blending into each other. After 1-to-1 matching, marijuana users had lower mortality and lower rates of intubation, ARDS, acute respiratory failure, and severe sepsis with multi-organ failure. The authors noted that the study's findings have clinical implications and called for further research into the potential link between cannabis use and COVID-19 outcomes. Now, there was an article and a study done out of Oregon State that said cannabis compounds can actually help block COVID-19. And I think Nancy Pelosi went on the news and said something about it. And she was blasted by the right for saying, look at them, they just want to legalize weed instead of help. You know, it's all propaganda and all nonsense distraction. But at Oregon State University said, research shows hemp compounds prevent coronavirus from entering human cells. And this study actually is confirming or helping that data kind of round itself out. So if you have one study by Oregon State saying it might prevent it from entering the system, and then another study saying if it does, the risk of mortality and failures and disease are less catching COVID if you smoke. Those are both positives towards cannabis. And it would kind of lead you to the assumption that cannabis helps in some way fight off or prevent COVID. That was my justification during the whole thing. What was yours? The significant decrease in mortality and complications warrants further investigation of the association between marijuana use and COVID-19. Our study highlights a topic of future research for larger trials, especially considering the widespread use of marijuana and how widespread the pandemic was. So far, research into possible associations between cannabis and COVID-19 have been limited. Marijuana Moment, where we refer to all the time, noted in a report on the new study. A 2022 study found that among hospitalized patients, cannabis users had lower COVID-19 severity and significantly better health outcomes. It's almost like they're reluctantly admitting it. It's like they're almost like, yeah, they were better. They did significantly better, but I don't want to talk about that. It's crazy, especially when they say trust the science. This is the science. Don't you want to get it out there? Another study conducted last year found that cannabis use was associated with a lower chance of contracting COVID-19, but cannabis was also linked to more serious infections. And a separate 2022 lab study by researchers at the University of Oregon determined that cannabis compounds prevented infection by the COVID-19 virus in human cells. The researchers are also exploring cannabis as a treatment for COVID-19, which is what we just talked about, but I did not know about the cannabis as a treatment for COVID. That is pretty crazy. Exploring the relationship between marijuana smoking and COVID-19 was published this month in a supplement to the peer-reviewed Chest Journal. So it is saying it is peer-reviewed. This is so interesting, the lengths they go through to minimize the positive effects of cannabis and marijuana, whatever you want to call it, to your health if it goes against their narrative. It's very fascinating. I don't want to get into too much on this channel and say the CVID word too many times or else I'll get flagged. And I'm really not saying anything that isn't peer-reviewed and scientifically accurate and published by universities, by journals, and by clinicians, doctors all over the world. Trust the science, right? Well, the science says that cannabis users have a significantly lower mortality and serious infection rate than non-cannabis users. So if you just stayed at home and smoked all day during COVID, which a lot of people did, I don't know. Let us know how your COVID was. Let us know in the comments. Was it severe? Was it not? If you're a user, let us know if you had it, if you didn't, why you think that is. I can't begin to explain how different everybody is based on their health and their daily things that they do, but let us know. What do you think about this science? I personally love it, and I think it should be shared. So, stay blessed.